Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. So it is Saturday at about 10:17. So far, a very nice day. The weather was pretty crappy for the most part yesterday, but then it got relatively nice out. One of the things that I talk about a lot is, my favorite things to do in my free time when I have the time to to go to events or whatnot. But even with shows or things, most gigs these days are on the early side. That's been a big shift over the last few years. A lot of gigs are over early, and like for example, I had a gig last weekend, and it was a little bit of a drive from here. It was about an hour and 10 minutes, and that was up in Ellsworth, Maine, which is a cool little town. And I had a gig up there, but it was early, and we were done by I think like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And I had a friend that was playing later that night at about 8 to 11. And so after the gig, I got packed up, and I started driving back home. And I was, feeling pretty good after the gig. It was fun, and it was just a 2 hour gig, and I was feeling kind of got my second wind, and I was like, oh, okay, I want to go out and see some music. But then at one point, I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of tired, and they were playing in Camden, Maine, and coming from Ellsworth, it's a drive. I mean, it's Camden's about half hour, 15, 20 minutes from my house. So it was close to, an hour, just under 2 hours for me to drive from the gig Ellsworth and just drive straight down to Camden. A little less than 2 hours. So it's a drive, And so I was on the fence for a few minutes on the way when I was coming back. And again, it was still early. But then I got my second win, and I decided to drive down. And I had a great time. I ran into a buddy of mine and hung out there, and the music was great. And it was fun. It was super cool. So it's like my favorite, my two favorite things to do in my free time or when there's events going on is to go see live music and to go to the movies. I went to the movies last weekend. I saw the last Voyage of the Demeter. And then before that, a week or 2 weeks before that, I think it was 2 weeks before that, but I went to go see the new Christopher Nolan movie, Oppenheimer. So been going to the movies a little bit more, and looking forward to going again. I'm not really sure of anything that's out right now that I want to see, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. There's there's some stuff, so I might try to go. And the other thing, when I have some time free or whatever, uh, I will try to check out, see what's going on. See what's going on as far as music goes and just events, because it's my going to see live music is probably my pretty much my favorite thing to do at outright. Well, it's really closely tied to going to the movies, but I really, for me personally, artistically, if you want to use that word, I find it, well, I look at it at two different on two different levels. When I go see a band, and it doesn't really matter what style it is. If it's something I like or it's interesting, I'll go see it. I don't really care if it's this or that. And naturally, there's things I want to see. Like I typically will definitely go see a band if there's drums, if there's a full band, as opposed to like a solo guitar player. I will still go to that, but if there's like drums involved in a full band, whatever style it is, I will definitely go. But I look at it in two levels. Like I from a music fan perspective, I love going because I just love the experience. And then on the other side of things, I go to see music because for me, as a musician and as an artist and all those things, it's like filling up filling up my gas tank. It inspires me. It gives me fuel. It really it 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 inspires me, and it really helps keep the motivation coming, and just my personal motivation. It like fuels me up. Even if it's like if I happen to see music that, maybe it's not so great, or maybe it's not really my cup of tea. I There's always something I take away from it. And I look at it also, in that same context, I look at it as an educational thing. I feel like because as a musician and as an artist, first and foremost, I don't really believe in someone being complacent. I don't really believe in someone being comfortable in their laurels all the time. And I feel like, on one hand, that is great because it gives you a sense of humility and you never stop learning, which I truly believe. There's always that next thing, there's always that new thing, there's always that new, you know, thing that you want to reach. And at the other hand, part of it that could be detrimental, at least for me personally, is I'm very restless, and it causes me to be a little bit on edge because I'm always trying to like think about things in terms of how can I make it better? How can I add some kind of other ingredient to what's going on or to what I'm doing right now? So it causes me to be restless to the point of where, it can be a little bit much. But I'd rather be in that slightly uncomfortable mode than be someone who feels like they've arrived at to that situation, if that makes any sense. And then I also just flat out believe that it's important to support local live music. I just do. I just think it's, you know, a lot of people say, when they talk about, say, social or political things, of where, my vote doesn't count, or I don't really have any say so in our community, or I don't like, you know uh, what is one person, how can one person make a difference, or that kind of thing. So a lot of people are, throw up their hands because they're frustrated or they just don't participate, and I understand that. But I feel like one way that you can make a difference, and again, this is just my opinion, one way you can make a difference in how the local economy is, how the local scene is, and there's also this trickle down effect, and one thing does affect the other person, or what happens at one business can affect the other business. Is I feel like, well, one way I can make a difference, even if it's on a really small scale, is support the local art that's going on, and put my dollar where my mouth is, like go and support that stuff. And I think that's, for me personally, very very important. And so, because it affects the whole collective, or loosely, or the loose collective, the whole scene. So that's just like a choice that I make. But last night was great. I got to see live music, and there was so many choices. It was crazy. I got to see three different bands all in one night, and I was able to check it all out, and it was all kind of within the same vicinity. And there were so many events that went on, and it was super cool. It was great. And then tonight there's a DJ that I'm going to go see at Marshall Wharf, which is an awesome bar in Belfast. And again, electronic music is my favorite style, and I miss going to DJ parties more than anything. Like, it's very rare when that happens. So tonight they're doing something at the Three Tides. So I'm excited to check it out, and it's not till later. So, and again, that's when I talk about why I do those things. That's it. It's those are the motivations of why I try to do it. I have a lot of friends that don't really. I do and I don't. That I have friends that don't go out very much, and some friends that do go out a lot. It's an interesting, weird thing because you know I sometimes think friends that I have are, in some regards, I'm older than they are, and I sometimes feel like they have habits like that you'd think grandparents would have, of where after their day is done or they have the day off, come around 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, they just want to stay home. I'm not usually that person. I'm totally the opposite. So I just if I want to go to it, I'll just do it. So that's just how I am. But anyway, today's show is on a movie that I just love this movie so much, and I was super excited. I got it. I went to Bull Moose on Monday, my home away from home, the greatest place. Um, and I scored on a bunch of really cool movies. I did a big show on Lucio Fulci's Zombie about 2 days ago, and then I just did a special kind of spin-off show of where I just did a show on the director of that amazing movie, arguably or probably the greatest zombie movie behind Dawn of the Dead, George Romero. Night of the Living Dead is such a classic. That movie really ushered in a whole new level of horror as far as I'm concerned. Changed the world of cinema. It's probably one of the most influential movies ever made. And I love that movie to death. And there's a lot of George Romero was an iconic director, but I kind of feel like Dawn of the Dead is probably the best thing he's ever done. That movie is just so awesome on so many levels. And I kind of feel like that's probably the best zombie movie, but then after watching Lucio Fulci's Zombie, I was just like, "Oh my god, what a masterpiece." And so I did a spin-off show of where I wanted to just do a coverage of where I talked about my favorite horror director of all time, which is Lucio Fulci, the great Italian horror exploitation director. So when I went up there, I bought a bunch of movies. So I've been slowly working my way through them, and today's show is on this total masterpiece, Night of the Creeps. Um, this movie is such a fun ride, such a classic. I'd never seen it on Blu-ray before. I've seen this movie. Again, this is a similar story to other movies that I've seen in kind of the horror, sci-fi, exploitation world. This movie came out in 1986. This was a movie I used to see a lot. I saw a bunch of times when I was a kid. I It's been a few years. It's been a hot minute since I've actually seen this movie. I saw it. I watched it again probably about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and I just was like enamored by what an amazing movie this is. And I've never seen it on Blu-ray. And when I went to Bull Moose, they had it there on Blu-ray, and it was super cheap, like $7, and comes with special features. And again, I've said before too, a lot of times watching movies on Blu-ray or 4K, even if it's a movie you've seen before, it's like watching it for the first time, and that's truly what this experience was. Just such an amazing movie. I think one of the best byproducts of the super low budget campy exploitation genre. One of the best movies that came out of the '80s. Classic horror elements, classic sci-fi elements. It's just amazing, and the whole and it's also a zombie movie, and it's interesting because I just finished up Zombie by Lucio Fulci, and I forgot how I kind of consider this a zombie movie in a lot of ways because I mean, and it's way on the heavy side of sci-fi because the premise of it is that these aliens are doing these experiments on in space on these new kind of hybrid creatures, and so they send this vessel to Earth, and in these in this experiment, these experimental creatures that the aliens have created basically take over this town, and they're like these little mini slugs, and they basically get in the brains of the people, and they turn the people into these zombies, and they turn them into these like homicidal killers. And that's kind of the premise of the story. And the only thing that can destroy them is fire. But they can jump from one person to the next. These little like slug-like alien creatures, and it's just so awesome. It's super campy. It's super ridiculous. It's got great elements of horror. Like it's really gory. The practical effects are just so killer. It's super funny. It's kind of like a black comedy. It also has a lot of heart and soul. Beautifully directed. The music is great. Some of the best '80s music that you'll ever hear. And it totally captures the whole '80s aesthetic. Um, Tom Atkins is in this movie, who is one of the best kind of character actors around, and he really was, and he was in a ton of these low budget, old school kind of horror exploitation movies. And there's a really great documentary on here, or interview with Tom Atkins on this collection that's really awesome. You know, he's amazing. I mean, he's always been one of my favorites. And he was in The Fog, John Carpenter's The Fog. He was also in masterpiece. Also, Escape from New York, which is another masterpiece. Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, just so phenomenal. Night of the Creeps, this bad boy right here. He was also in Maniac Cop, which he is so awesome in that as well. And then he also was in some really big budget Hollywood movies. The most notably the first Lethal Weapon movie, which was like a huge Hollywood blockbuster. But he primarily, his focus as a most of the films he was in all of these kind of low budget independent horror exploitation movies in the 70s and 80s. Um, and I love all those movies. I'm particularly always drawn to Season of the Witch, Halloween 3. I just love that movie. That's like one of my favorite kind of horror exploitation movies ever. One of the best sci-fi movies. And I have to say, probably Night of the Creeps is probably the best thing he's ever done. There's a really awesome interview with him in this movie. Super fascinating. It was directed by, well, it was written and directed by Fred Decker. Came out in 1986. Uh, and like I talked about how awesome the music is, the music was all composed by Barry DeVerizon. Just incredible. Amazing cast. Tom Atkins, of course. Jill Withlow. Jason Lively. Steve Marshall. Um, yeah, it's kind of the epitome of like low budget sci-fi horror exploitation. The gore elements in this movie are really great. I forgot about how actually gory this film is. And like I said, I just finished doing a review and watching Zombie. And this movie has totally has that same quality as like a classic zombie movie. Even though it's a, like kind of a Space Invaders kind of premise, and it's definitely more on, I mean, the whole zombie um, genre, is bigger than, it's such a massive genre. And obviously, it always has some kind of sci-fi element. I mean, even going back to say Night of the Living Dead, the kind of even in the storyline for that is where there is some kind of atmospheric alien chemical that's in space that works its way to Earth that causes this like apocalypse. So there's a deep, heavy sci-fi element to that movie, and so that the science fiction element has always been tied to the genre. But this movie is, there is even more of a definitive collection to or connection to the science fiction thing because of the more or less of the premise of these aliens that have created this new kind of organism, and it's essentially about like alien invasion, but it takes on all the classic tropes of the zombie aesthetic, and it's amazing. I forgot how gory this film is, and I also forgot how hilarious this movie is. It's so it's so funny at times. Like I was laughing out loud. Michael Decker, who was the director of Night of the Creeps, he also was the writer. He wrote and directed this film. Um, and pretty big name in the whole like independent world for a long time. He directed a movie, The Monster Squad, 1987, another classic 80s movie. I didn't realize that. Night of the Creeps, of course, came out in '86. It's probably the biggest movie of his career, but he made a ton of movies. I didn't realize too. He directed RoboCop 3. I'm gonna have to see that again in the '90s, 1993. Another horror movie he did in 1985 called House. A newer movie, Wolfman's Got Nards, 2018. He also made a sequel to House, House 2, The Second Story. Um, Ricochet, which I didn't realize. I think that's with Lawrence Fishburne, 91. If Looks Could Kill in 1991. The Edge in 2015. But so great, so great. Just he was an American or is an American screenwriter, and he's most well known for horror. They're kind of classified as horror comedies, but Night of the Creeps and the Monster Squad are probably his two biggest movies. But just a fabulous movie. The transfer of this movie on Blu-ray is amazing. The sound, it's all remastered. The quality of it is just so badass. One of the best, definitely one of the best. I have a pretty good sound system here at the Film Fanatic headquarters, and I can tell right away when they put in a lot of love and care in the reassembling or a new edition of a certain movie, and this is one of the best that I've seen in a while. Classic movie. It's got so many great fun elements. I look at this as being a great movie, a great party movie. Night of the Creeps, 1986, one of the best sci-fi low budget horror slash comedy exploitation movies ever. And this is this so acts I feel like this movie also just acts as like a time capsule for the 80s, like just so amazing. So I highly recommend it. I was super excited when I bought this. I've been wanting to see this on Blu-ray for a very long time, similar to Zombie. So yeah, very excited. And it's probably the like I mentioned, Tom Atkins. He's one of my favorite actors, and but besides, like I mentioned, Season of the Witch, Halloween 3, classic. Night of the Creeps is probably his best role. It's hard to say, but he's been in so many great movies. He's an icon in the world of the horror kind of exploitation world. So please check it out if you've never gotten it. If you've never seen Night of the Creeps, do yourself a favor and check it out. All right, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.